Predaplants just got one of the coolest anime-inspired boss mods they could have possibly made. Because Starving Venom Wing Dragon is basically what happens when Yuri and Yugo combine into one upgraded form. It brings together Yuri's Starving Venom Fusion Dragon and Yugo's Clearwing Synchro Dragon. While the new support also adds Synchro Summoning to the Predaplant strategy. So first we take a look at the deck profile, then I'll showcase some basic combos they can do, including how to end on a board like this. And now without any further ado, let's get started.
Okay, normally I always start off with the main deck cards, but this time I'm going to do things a little bit differently and start with the extra deck instead. Because for this deck, the extra deck gives you a much clearer picture of what the strategy is actually trying to do. And once you understand the boss monsters and the end board, it becomes a lot easier to see what all the main deck cards are contributing to that game plan. So let's start with the brand new boss monster of the deck, Starving Venom Wing Dragon. It requires a fusion monster and a Clearwing monster as material, and design wise it looks like a fusion between Starving Venom Fusion Dragon and Clearwing Synchro Dragon. And that's a really cool anime reference, because a lot of the new support adds Synchro Summoning to the Predaplant strategy, which is exactly what happened in the anime after Yuri absorbed Yugo. He suddenly gained the ability to Synchro Summon, and he was even able to summon Clearwing Synchro Dragon. So this card basically feels like the monster Yuri would have had if he fused Starving Venom with Clearwing together. In other words, the new support is almost like Yuri's upgraded deck after absorbing Yugo, and its effects also feel like a combination of both dragons. If your opponent special summons a monster, Starving Venom Wing Dragon can target one of those monsters, gains its attack, and negates its effects until the end of the turn. That feels like a reference to both Clearwing and Starving Venom. Clearwing could negate monster effects, destroy monsters, and gain its attack points, although under more specific conditions. And the original Starving Venom could gain the attack of one of your opponent's special summon monsters when it was fusion summoned. Its second effect lets you non-target destroy a card on the field when a card or effect is activated. I guess this is meant to be a reference to Starving Venom's destruction effect, although copying that effect completely might have been a little bit too much. And its third effect lets you place it in your pendulum zone if it is destroyed in the monster zone. That is actually really useful because its pendulum effect places a predator counter on each monster that is special summoned to your opponent's field. And as always, monsters with a predator counter become level 1. Now by itself that might not sound too crazy, but it pairs perfectly with Predaplants Dragostapelia, a monster that negates the activated effects of your opponent's monsters that have predator counters. And Starving Venom Wing Dragon places a predator counter on every monster that is special summoned to the opponent's field. So together, these basically function as a one-sided skill drain. To summon Starving Venom Wing Dragon, we also play the original Clearwing Synchro Dragon, which can once per turn negate and destroy a level 5 or higher monster on the field. And it can also negate a monster effect that specifically targets a level 5 or higher monster, destroy that monster and then gains its attack points. Of course, we also play the OG Starving Venom Fusion Dragon. On top of the effects I mentioned earlier, it can also copy the name and effects of a level 5 or higher monster your opponent controls until the end phase. Now let's go over the other upgraded versions of these monsters. Depending on when you're watching this, and whether it has been released in the TCG yet, you also definitely want to include the brand new Starving Venom Fusion Dragon of the 4 Heavenly Dragons. This new version of Starving Venom is always treated as a Predaplant card, which finally ties Yuri's signature monster directly to the archetype. If it's special summoned, it can target a monster on the field, negate its effects, change it to dark, and make its attack 0. And if your opponent activates a card or effect, you can immediately perform a fusion summon of a dark fusion monster using dark monsters from either field. So this card can disrupt your opponent in multiple ways. And it's also pretty easy to summon during the opponent's turn, and I'll show you how that works in the combo section of the video. Next we have Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon. With the new support, this card is now very easy to summon in Predaplants. It can negate the activation of a monster effect, destroy that monster, and then gains its original attack points until the end of the turn. And if it battles a level 5 or higher monster, it can gain that monster's attack during damage calculation only. Then we have Starving Venom Predapower Fusion Dragon. This card can negate the activation of a card or effect by tributing a monster on either field with a predator counter. And if it's sent to the graveyard by an opponent's card while it was fusion summoned, it can special summon a dark monster from the graveyard. That means that it can even bring back itself. And the negate effect is only a soft once per turn. So if Predapower revives itself with its own effect, you can use the negate again. And if you also have Starving Venom Wing Dragon in the pendulum zone, your opponent's monsters should be getting predator counters every time they are special summoned. Which means Predapower can theoretically tribute your opponent's own monsters to negate their cards 2 times. Absolutely disgusting. Now let's move on to the extra deck monsters that are more focused on setup and utility. First up is Predaplant Ambula Melodies. When it's fusion summoned, it can add a Predaplant monster or a Predap spell or trap from your deck, graveyard or face-up extra deck to your hand. And it can also tribute a monster you control or an opponent's monster with a Predator counter to special summon a Predaplant monster from the deck. So this card helps you search, extend and potentially remove one of your opponent's monsters if you have a Predator counter set up. Next is Predaplant Balthea. If it's Synchro Summoned, you can special summon a Predaplant or Starving Venom monster from your graveyard or face-up extra deck. And while it's in the graveyard, if your opponent special summons a monster, you can banish it together with a Polymerization to fusion summon using monsters from your hand or field. So for example, you can use this to summon the brand new Starving Venom Heavenly Dragon during your opponent's turn. The remaining non-archetype extra deck cards are Bramble Rose Dragon, Black Rose Dragon, and Fada Dragna. Bramble Rose and Black Rose are mainly here because they make it very easy to go into Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon. And Fada Dragna gives the deck some extra utility. It prevents your opponent from targeting your fusion monster with card effects. And if it's sent to the graveyard as fusion material, it can special summon a fusion monster from your deck in defense position with its effect negated. That monster then returns to the extra deck during the end phase. So this card is mainly here to put additional fusion material on the field. But because its own materials are just two monsters with the same type and attribute but different levels, it can also be used as a super polymerization target. So that gives us 13 extra deck cards. I consider the final 2 slots to be flex spots. So here are a few options you can play depending on your personal preference, your playstyle, or simply as substitutes until some of these newer cards are released. You could play a second copy of Crystal Wing, since this deck can actually summon 2 copies pretty easily in a single turn. And if you really want to lean into the Clear Wing side of the deck, you can even consider playing Yugo's ultimate upgraded form, Crystal Clear Wing over Synchro Dragon. This card can once per turn negate the activation of any card or effect and destroy it. And if it destroys a monster, it gains that monster's original attack. It's definitely not the easiest card to summon, and I don't think it deserves a main spot in every version of the deck. But since this is a Predaplant Clearwing deck profile, I had to show that it is possible. And I'll show you exactly how to summon it in the combo section of the video. If you don't want to go that deep into the Clearwing package, you can also use those flex spots for more standard options. You can also add specific super polymerization targets like Garura or Mud Dragon. And depending on when you're watching this, you could also consider Predaplant Dead Evil. This card has already been released in the OCG as a valuable book promo, and those usually take quite a while to arrive in the TCG. Dead Evil can be fusion summoned or special summoned by tributing a monster with a Predator counter on either field and a Predaplant monster. And the turn it's special summoned, it has a quick effect that can target spells and traps on the field up to the number of monsters with Predator counters and destroy them. So this gives the deck another way to tribute an opponent's monster and deal with problematic back row. And that's it for the extra deck. So now that we know what the archetype is trying to do and end on, let's move on to the main deck. We start off with a familiar face, Predaplant Off-Risk Scorpio. This is still a great card since it can special summon any Predaplant monster from the deck by sending a monster from your hand to the graveyard. And traditionally the monster you would summon with this effect was of course Cobra, because this monster has a very powerful search ability, letting you add any polymerization or fusion spell card from your deck to your hand when it was special summoned. Which is why this effect can only be used once per duel. And you can still summon Cobra off Scorpio, however with the new support, we now have another target that's a lot better in most circumstances. Predaplant Longinephila. When this monster is summoned, it can search any Predap card from your deck. So Predaplants finally have their own in-archetype Stratos. On top of that, it also has a couple of utility graveyard effects. By banishing it from the graveyard, you can either set a polymerization from your graveyard or banishment, or you can place a Predator counter on a monster on either side of the field. So this card already gives the deck a much better search option, but the fact that it's also a tuner is what really pushes it over the top. It makes it much easier to access some of the new synchro plays. The next new card is Predaplant Lizard. This one can special summon itself from the hand if you already control a Predaplant or Starving Venom monster, and when it's summoned it searches polymerization. Just like Longinephila, it also comes with some extra utility. It can change a monster's attribute to dark, which is very relevant in a deck like this, and if Lizard is special summoned from the graveyard you also get to draw a card. For the final Predaplant main deck monsters we have Predaplant Biblisp, and the little pendulum duo Biofulicula and Triantis. Let's start with the pendulum monsters. Triantis can place Predator counters on the field when it's used as fusion material, up to the number of monsters you control, and its pendulum effect can also come up, since it allows you to use monsters in your pendulum zones as fusion material for a dark fusion monster. Then we have Fulicula, which is still a really solid option. It can fusion summon a dark fusion monster from the Pendulum Zone using monsters from your hand or field as material. And if it's sent to the graveyard or face-up extra deck as fusion material, you can add a face-up dark Pendulum monster from your extra deck to your hand. So together, Triantis and Fulicula give the deck some extra utility. Then we have Biblisp, which searches any Predaplant monster from your deck when it's sent to the graveyard. It can also special summon itself from the graveyard if a monster with a Predator counter is on the field, although it gets banished when it leaves the field. Biblisp was already good before, but the new support makes it much easier to send it to the graveyard. And that brings us to the only new non-Predaplant monster in the deck. Princess Dracaena, the Thirsting Tree. From the hand it can send any level 4 or lower plant monster from your deck to the graveyard as cost. So if you send Biblisp you can immediately trigger its search effects. And because sending the monster is cost, this part can all be stopped by an Ash Blossom for example. After that, Dracaena special summons itself and copies the level of the monster you send. Honestly, that alone would already make this card worth playing, but it gets even better. You can also banish Dracaena from the graveyard together with another plant monster to special summon a dragon monster from your hand or graveyard. And on top of that, it's also a tuner. Luckily, Konami did remember to put a restriction on this card, as they tend to forget a lot at the time. If you use any of its effects, you can only special summon dragon and plant monsters for the entire turn. So hopefully that's enough to keep this card in check. And that's it for the monsters. Now let's move on to the spells and trap. First up we have another new card, Predaprimitive. This card is actually somewhat similar to Dracaena. It sends a Predap card from your deck to the graveyard also as cost, and then searches any polymerization or fusion spell from your deck. So just like Cobra, this is another very powerful way to access your fusion spells. But similar to Dracaena, it also locks you into only special summoning plant and dragon monsters for the rest of the turn. It also has a graveyard effect. If your opponent special summons a monster, you can banish it from the graveyard to target and destroy a fusion monster. That might sound a little specific, but it actually has some interesting utility which I'll showcase in the combo section. Next we have Predapruning. This spell revives a Predaplant monster from your graveyard and then equips itself to that monster. Nothing too crazy, but it can come up in certain combo lines, especially when you need to bring back a specific monster to extend your plays. We're also playing 1 for 1. This lets you send a monster from your hand to the graveyard to special summon a level 1 monster from your deck. So it basically acts as another starter since it gives you direct access to Longinephila. Now let's go over the fusion spells. First we have Super Polymerization, one of Yuri's signature cards. One instant fusion which special summons a level 5 or lower fusion monster from the extra deck, although it cannot attack and is destroyed during the end phase. Next is Fusion Substitute. This card is always treated as Polymerization, which means the lizard can't search it. You could also choose to play the regular Polymerization instead, since Fusion Substitute can only use monsters on the field as material, not monsters in your hand. But during playtesting, I found that this almost never felt like a real drawback, and Fusion Substitute has a very relevant graveyard effect. By banishing it, you can return a fusion monster from your graveyard to the extra deck and then draw a card. That effect came up way more often, so I personally prefer it over the regular Polymerization. And finally a brand new fusion spell, Super Duper Polymerization. Just like Super Poly, neither player can respond to its activation. By paying 2000 life points, you can special summon a monster from the extra deck that has the same type and attribute but a different level of a monster on your field, but its effects are negated. Then you can immediately use it plus the monster you targeted for a fusion summon or send a summoned monster to the graveyard. This card definitely sounds a bit clunky at first, but there are some really cool plays you can make with it which I'll showcase later in the video. And for the only archetype trap card, we have Predaplanting. This trap sends a Predaplant monster from the deck to the grave and then places one Predator counter on each monster on the field. You can also banish it from the graveyard if you summon a Dark Fusion monster to target and destroy a monster on the field. So this card has obvious synergy with Dragostapelia. And that's it for the main archetype cards of the deck. So far we are playing 28 cards, which means we still have at least 12 open slots for staples. Those will heavily depend on the format and the environment you are playing in, so I'll show an example on screen, but you should always feel free to adjust the staple lineup based on what you expect to face. And that's it for the deck profile. Now on to the combos. Alright, the first combo is a 1.5 card combo with Dracaena. The only extra card you need is any other monster to this card. So for this example we'll use Ash Blossom, since it doesn't give us any additional benefits. We start by activating Dracaena from the hand. Send Biblisp from the deck to the graveyard as cost to special summon it. Because Biblisp was sent to the graveyard, we can trigger its effect to search Offrisk Scorpio. we normal summon it, use its effects, and send a monster from our hand to the graveyard to special summon Longinephila from the deck. Longinephila searches any Predap card when summoned. So here we grab Predaprimitive. This spell sends any Predap card from our deck to the grave as cost, so we use it to Foolish Cobra to the grave. And after that, Predaprimitive searches Instant Fusion. Now we tune Longinephila and Scorpio together to Synchro Summon Predaplant Balthea. On summon, Balthea can special summon a Predaplant or Starving Venom monster from the graveyard or face-up extra deck. So we bring back Cobra. And because Cobra was special summoned, it searches our new super duper polymerization. Next we tune it and Balthea together to make Bramble Rose Dragon. Now we can use Bramble Rose's effect here to tribute it and bring out Black Rose Dragon. Then we tune Black Rose with Dracaena to Synchro Summon our first Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon. And this is something we usually try to do whenever we open Dracaena. At this point we already have Crystal Wing on the field, which gives us protection against Nibiru. Of course the opponent can still use Nibiru earlier, but if they do, the main thing we lose are Crystal Wing on the end board and Bramble Rose in the graveyard. Now we continue by activating Instant Fusion to bring out Predaplant Ambulomilides. This monster searches Predaplant Lizard. Then it can special summon itself for free because we already control another Predaplant monster. And when Lizard is summoned from the hand this way, it searches Polymerization, or in this case Fusion Substitute. Next we use Ambulomilides' second effect. We tribute Lizard to special summon Triantis from the deck. Now we banish Bramble Rose from the graveyard to special summon Longinephila back. And we use Dracaena's graveyard effects, banishing it together with Cobra to revive Black Rose Dragon. Then we tune them together for the second Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon. Now we activate Fusion Substitute, using Triantis and Ambulomilides to fusion summon Predadragna. Because Triantis was used as fusion material, it places predator counters on our monsters. We need a predator counter on the field so we can special summon Biblis back from the graveyard. Now we use Super Duper Polymerization, target Predadragon, special summon Clearwing Synchro Dragon from the deck, and immediately use both monsters to fusion summon our big boss monster, Starving Venom Wing Dragon. Then Predadragna's effect activates in the graveyard, it can special summon a fusion monster from our extra deck in defense position with its effects negated, so we bring out the original Starving Venom Fusion Dragon. It's really important to make your second Crystal Wing before using Predadragna's effect, because after its effect resolves, you can only special summon fusion monsters from the extra deck for the rest of the turn. Next we banish Fusion Substitute from the graveyard, this lets us recycle Ambulomilides back to the extra deck and draw a card. Then we banish Longinephila from the graveyard to set that Fusion Substitute back to the field. So now we can use it again. Fusing Biblisp and Starving Venom Fusion Dragon into Predaplant Dragostapelia. And this is the final end board. But what did we actually achieve here? First, we have double Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon, which can both negate the activation of any monster effect and destroy it because it's a soft once per turn. Next we have Predaplant Dragostapelia. This card can place a predator counter on the opponent's monster as a quick effect. And since it negates the activated effects of monsters with predator counters, this basically gives us another monster negate. And then we have the new ultimate boss monster, Starving Venom Wing Dragon. If your opponent special summons a monster, Wing Dragon can target that monster, gains its attack and negate its effects. It can also destroy a card on the field when another card or effect is activated. And that destruction effect is actually really important here. You can use it to destroy one of your opponent's cards of course, but you can also destroy your own Wing Dragon. That might sound weird, but if your Wing Dragon is destroyed in the monster zone, it places itself in the pendulum zone. And once it's there, every monster your opponent special summons gets a predator counter. That means your Dragostapelia and Wing Dragon combo is now live, turning every special summon monster your opponent controls into something Dragostapelia can negate. We also have Predaprimitive in the graveyard, so if your opponent special summons a monster, you can banish Predaprimitive to destroy a fusion monster on the field. This gives you another way to destroy your own Wing Dragon after you've already used its effects. And finally we still have Fusion Substitute in the graveyard. You can banish it to recycle a fusion monster back to the extra deck and draw an extra card, or you can choose to leave it there, so you can banish it with Balthea later to fusion summon the new Starving Venom Heavenly Dragon during the opponent's turn. Although for that line you would still need additional dark monsters on the field. This combo is another variant of the first one, but this time we are going for a Predapower instead of a second Crystal Wing. After searching for a fusion substitute we are going to do things a little bit differently. First we banish Bramble Rose to revive Longinephila. This time, instead of Lizard, tribute Longinephila with Ambula Melodies to special summon Triantis from the deck. We use Fusion Substitute here to fuse Triantis and Ambula Melodies together to make Dracaena. Then Triantis places Predator counters on the field so we can reborn Biblis from the graveyard. Then, just like before, we banish Substitute to put back Ambula Melodies, to draw a card, and banish Longinephila to bring Fusion Substitute back. Then we use Lizard's second ability to turn Dracaena into a dark monster. Next we use Super Duper, target Dracaena, bring out Starving Venom, and then fuse them together to make Predapower. Dracaena's effect in the graveyard activates, so we can special summon a negated Ambula Melodies, then activate Fusion Substitute again, fuse Ambula Melodies with Lizard to make Dragostapelia. Finally banish Dracaena and Cobra to revive Dracaena. And now we end our turn, but our Venom Wing is still missing of course. But what we do is whenever our opponent special summons their first monster, we can activate Balthea in the graveyard, banish it along with Fusion Substitute, so we can fuse Dracaena and Biblisp to make a second Dragostapelia. Dracaena special summons a negated Venom Wing from the extra deck. Then if your opponent special summons something else, we can trigger Primitive in the graveyard to destroy our own negated Venom Wing, so the Venom Wing combo with Dragostapelia is live. So this endboard is pretty similar, but we now have a Predapower instead of an additional Crystal Wing, and instead of having Venom Wing on the field with its effects live, we have it in the Pendulum Zone with an additional Dragostapelia. And also keep in mind that as long as Dracaena is on the field, our fusion monsters are protected from being targeted. Alright, this is the last Dracaena combo, and this is definitely more of a fun combo than a standard line. I wouldn't say this is the route you should go for every game, but if you want to lean all the way into the Yuri and Yugo theme, this one is really cool. Because with this combo we are going to summon Yugo's level 12 Synchro boss monster, Crystal Clearwing over Synchro Dragon. For this combo you need Dracaena, any monster to discard, and either Offrisk Scorpio, Lizard or Primitive. We start after summoning Ambula Melodies with Instant Fusion, because the first part of the combo is almost the same as the previous Dracaena lines. The only thing that changes is the Biblisp search. After summoning Ambula Melodies, this time we search Predapruning. Then we special summon the Lizard and search Fusion Substitute. Next we use Predapruning to revive Balthea, and tune it with the Lizard to Synchro Summon Clearwing Synchro Dragon. After that we banish Bramble Rose to bring back Balthea again. Then we banish Longinephila to place a Predator counter on Ambula Melodies, so we can revive Biblis from the graveyard. We tribute Biblis with Ambula Melody's second effect to special summon a second copy of Longinephila from the deck. And now we have everything we need for Crystal Clearwing over Synchro Dragon, 2 tuners and Clearwing Synchro Dragon. So we use Balthea, Longinephila and Clearwing to Synchro Summon Crystal Clearwing over Synchro Dragon. Next we banish Dracaena and Cobra from the graveyard to revive Clearwing. Then we activate Super Duper Polymerization, target Clearwing, special summon Dracaena, and fuse them together into Starving Venom Wing Dragon. Now Dracaena's effect activates in the graveyard, letting us special summon the original Starving Venom Fusion Dragon from the extra deck. And finally we still have Fusion Substitute in hand. So we have enough material to make either Predapower or Dragostapelia. Dragostapelia is usually the better option here, because it completes the Wing Dragon and Dragostapelia setup. Again, this is not necessarily the best game plan, but for a Yuri Yugo themed Predaplant Clearwing deck, I had to show that this was possible. This combo is a 1.5 card combo with Longinephila plus any monster to discard. We start by normal summoning Longinephila, which searches Primitive. Primitive sends Biblis to the graveyard and searches Instant Fusion. Biblis then searches Lizard special summons itself and grabs Fusion Substitute. Then we Synchro Summon Balthea, and Balthea brings back Lizard. Lizard draws us a card, and then we use both monsters to Synchro Summon Bramble Rose Dragon. We tribute Bramble Rose to summon Black Rose, and then we banish Bramble Rose to bring back Longinephila, and use it with Black Rose to Synchro Summon Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon. From here, we activate Instant Fusion to special summon Ambula Melodies. Now we search Predapruning. Then we banish Longinephila to place a predator counter on the field, which allows us to bring back Biblis from the graveyards. We tribute Biblis with Emblem Melodies to special summon, offer Scorpio from the deck, Scorpio discards a monster to special summon Darlingtonia Cobra, and Cobra searches Super Duper Polymerization. Then we use Predapruning to bring back Balthea. After that we use Balthea and Scorpio to Synchro Summon Clearwing Synchro Dragon. Then we activate Super Duper Polymerization, target Clearwing, and bring out Fetid Dracaena, and we immediately fuse them together to make Starving Venom Wing Dragon. Fetid Dracaena's graveyard effect then special summons Starving Venom Fusion Dragon directly from the extra deck. Now we still have Fusion Substitute left, which we can use to make either Predapower or Dragostapelia. So this combo ends slightly differently from the first one. We don't end on an additional Clearwing, but we do have an extra dark body on the field. And since Balthea and Fusion Substitute are both in the graveyard, one more dark monster on the field is enough to Fusion Summon Starving Venom Heavenly Dragon during the opponent's turn. And finally, I want to show you a couple of lines for when your opponent hits you with a Mulcharmy, because this deck definitely doesn't love playing into cards like Mulcharmy or Droll, but it doesn't mean you always have to give your opponent a million draws just to end on something. So here's a lower commitment combo that still gives you a decent amount of interaction. We start by normal summoning Longinephila to search Predaprimitive. This sends Biblis to the grave to grab Super Polymerization. Then Biblis searches Lizard. The Lizard special summons from the hand and searches Fusion Substitute. Now we Synchro Summon Balthea. And Balthea brings back Lizard. So here your opponent does get a draw from Balthea's special summon. But Lizard also draws us a card. Next we activate Fusion Substitute to Fusion Summon Emblem Melodies. He searches for Predaplanting. Then we banish Longinephila from the graveyard to place a predator counter on the field, which allows us to reborn Biblis. And from here we can't stop. At this point, your opponent only drew 2 cards from Fuelos, so they only went +1. But we also drew an extra card with Lizard, which gives us another chance to find a hand trap or another form of disruption. And I know this board doesn't look impressive, but we actually have a decent amount of interactions. The first time your opponent special summons a monster, you can banish Balthea and Fusion Substitute from the graveyard to Fusion Summon Starving Venom Fusion Dragon of the 4 Heavenly Dragons. If it is special summoned, you can target another monster on the field, negate its effects, change it to dark and make its attack 0. Then when your opponent activates anything, Starving Venom can Fusion Summon a Dark Fusion monster using dark monsters from either field. So you can use the opponent's monster you just negated as fusion material to make Dragostapelia. Depending on the situation, you might even skip the new Starving Venom entirely and go straight into Dragostapelia instead. Dragostapelia is also a monster negate, but it can be more flexible depending on when you need to use it. Then we also have Predaplanting. This trap can place predator counters on all monsters currently on the field. So as long as your Dragostapelia is still active, Predaplanting can essentially become another monster negate, or even multiple negates depending on when you need to activate it. On top of that, we still have Super Polymerization to potentially fuse away the opponent's monsters. That can make one of our Super Poly targets or even another Dragostapelia, since Dragostapelia's negate is not a hard once per turn. And if Predaplanting is already in the graveyard when you fusion summon, you can banish it to target and destroy a card on the field. Now going back to the point where we revive Biblis from the graveyard, there is also another option. You can tribute Biblis with Emblem Melodies to special summon Cobra from the deck. Of course this gives your opponent an extra draw, but in exchange, Cobra can search another Super Polymerization. So this part really depends on the situation, but giving your opponent one extra draw in exchange for an additional Super Poly is definitely something worth considering. And for the final variant, instead of fusion summoning Emblem Melodies, you can make Fetid Dracaena instead. Then during your opponent's turn, you can activate Balthea to fusion summon Dragostapelia. Since Fetid Dracaena was sent to the graveyard as fusion material, you can special summon another fusion monster from the extra deck with its effects negated. So here, we summon a negated Starving Venom Wing Dragon. Then where your opponent special summons again, you can trigger Predaprimitive in the graveyard to destroy your own Wing Dragon. And because it was destroyed in the monster zone, Wing Dragon places itself in the pendulum zone. So now the Wing Dragon Dragostapelia lock is live. while giving your opponent only a minimal amount of draws. And on top of that, we still have the super polymerization we searched earlier. And that's it for the deck profile and combos. If you found this video helpful, let me know by liking, subscribing and telling me in the comments what your favorite Predaplant card is. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.